All right, welcome everyone to the Berardi Immigration Law YouTube Live. We're going to get started in just a minute and tell you everything you need to know about the upcoming administration's plans with respect to U.S. immigration law. So just give us another minute or so and we'll get started. Hello, everyone. Rosanna Berardi from Berardi Immigration Law. Thank you for attending our YouTube Live on all things immigration. We're going to get started shortly in about a minute, so stay tuned and we will be ready to go shortly. Okay, let's kick this off. Welcome, everyone. I'm Rosanna Berardi. I'm the managing partner of Berardi Immigration Law. We're a business immigration law firm based in Buffalo, New York. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here with my colleague, Andrea Godfread-Brown. Hi, Andy.
Hi. It's a mouthful. You can say Andy.
And Andy and I have been around for many, many administrations with respect to immigration. We've both been practicing over 25 years, only in U.S. immigration law. And so, like I say to a lot of people, this isn't our first rodeo. This isn't our first experience with a change of administration. Every time an administration changes, it's always interesting. This time we're hearing a lot about it in the news. So, Andy, why don't you tell us just a little bit about your background, how long you've been with the firm?
Sure. I've been practicing employment-based immigration law since 2001. And that was, at the time I was in-house with the university, and that was shortly after September 11th, which was a big sea change with immigration law. That's when INS went away and came on. And so, yes, been through a lot of changes, but I should say at the outset, I don't have any experience with deportation or asylum. So my experience is all employment-based.
Great. So we're here today because, as everyone knows, President-elect Trump will take office in January of 2025. And with respect to the campaign and the election, immigration was the number 2 issue for American voters, right behind the inflation and economy. So financial issues, the economy, and then immigration. So people are fed up. People want change. I think we saw that in the polls, and we've seen a lot of language coming out of the Trump administration. We've lived through administration before. So let's just talk a little bit about legal immigration, Andy. How does that differ from what we're hearing a lot about the border and migrants and things of that nature?
Yeah, I think a lot of the national media attention and a lot of the rhetoric, it has been focused on, no matter, even under Biden administration, when you hear immigration in the news, largely focused on the southern border and efforts around that. That's not what I do, or we do. And I think what gets lost in that conversation is that there's a whole sort of parallel immigration happening, which is, legal immigration, whether it's based on family or employment, people who come in lawfully under a variety of visa statuses to study, to work, to join family members, maybe to eventually get permanent resident status. So we've seen some impacts to lawful immigration, but any changes to legislation, long term, we haven't seen any significant reform to immigration laws in that respect for decades.
Yeah, so it's funny because when I tell people I'm an immigration lawyer, they say, "Oh, how do you keep up with the law?" And I said, "Oh, very easy. It hasn't changed since 1997." So, I mean, the Immigration and Nationality Act as we know it was really based from the 1950s. The 1952 Act was the major piece of legislation in Congress. And the last it was like meaningfully updated was 1996, 1997. So what we're hearing about in these changes and what's going to happen is really done by executive order. And we've seen lots and lots of executive orders from every administration you could possibly think of. Barack Obama's administration really brought executive orders to the forefront. And, it sidesteps democracy a little bit because it lets the president take a piece of law and reinterpret it. So I'm sure many of you remember under the first Trump administration, there was the travel ban, right? Like people were stuck midair and they couldn't come in and it was chaotic. But also remember what happened to a lot of those executive orders. We have three separate layers of government. We've got the executive branch, the judiciary, and the legislative branch. And thank God we have checks and balances. So if something crazy or extreme is being proposed or comes out executive order, it always winds up in litigation and most of the time goes away. And did you expect that with the next go around of the administration?
Yeah, I do. I think maybe not. It's hard to know. Everything we are seeing right now and know about how the Trump administration goes about things, it's, we're looking back and we're trying to come up with some reasonable set of expectations and calculating the risks. But yeah, I expect there will be executive orders. I think the most immediate impact really will be in terms of travel and maybe more restrictions in visa issuance at the U.S. consulates. That's where an administration can make some quick policy changes and people might feel the impacts. But like, as you pointed out, as far as changes to the law, not that some won't be proposed, but then there's a pretty lengthy process where that can be contested. So with those, I'm not even going to speculate, but I do think it's reasonable to think about, like you said, Rosanna, how do you keep up with the laws? That's not so difficult. How do you keep up with changes in policy, changes in process, a rash of executive orders? And, like you said, we've been there before, and that's what we're here to do, is work with clients, filter some of the noise and some of the panic out of it, and really address, what might impact in an immediate sense and what might be a longer term concern.
Definitely. And I think we're going to see a lot of movement, if you will, in January. Excuse me. I'm watching, it's been 2 weeks since the election, and I'm watching what I call the constant drip of the news cycle. Every day there's something about immigration. It's not saying a lot. The headlines are very vague, but I think it reflects the election results, and I think it reflects the Trump administration's commitment to immigration, whatever that is, good, better, worse. And I think we're going to see some things come out that might be a little bit chaotic and questionable in January. But certainly we'll be watching these closely and acting as a strategic partner to our client.
Yeah. And it's worth reminding people, honestly, even though, I was practicing the same type of law, and it was not that long ago, under the first Trump administration, I had forgotten some things until I really sort of looked back and reflected on it. And one thing I found reassuring, which is already happening again, is that our professional networks and our resources are really good. Having been through it, we kind of know what might be noise and what are valid resources. And honestly, I was thinking about this. My sort of general advice to employers or individuals or whoever they might be hasn't really changed, which is, find a reliable source and legal advisor you trust, have a backup plan, and, stay on top of the things that might actually impact you or your business, but don't get caught up in the things that won't.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for legal immigration, it's really important to know what your plan is, when your expiration date is. You definitely want to be in control. And that's just general good immigration advice that we recommend no matter what's going on. Now, in terms of, we do a lot of work in the tech sector, and there's been, I feel like between AI and immigration threats, the tech sector seems to be a direct hit. What do you anticipate based, if you had a crystal ball based on what we saw the last time for tech workers, professionals, highly skilled labor, what do you think we might see with respect? And please know, this is all speculation. We've not seen anything in writing, but based on what you're hearing and what you've listened to, Andy, what do you think is the likelihood, or what do you think is going to really impact that industry?
Well, I don't think it's any big secret that, Trump has spoken about wanting to change things to be more geared towards highly skilled, the best and brightest. And one thing they tried to do in the past was, to adjust the prevailing wage rates to, for eligibility for like the H-1B visa. So I do think there might be restrictive efforts that will come into play and some proposed changes to those programs. But, Elon Musk is at play as well. So you have tech industry people in the next administration, it could look quite different. I don't know what they're going to do in practical effect. But I would expect, the two things I would expect just with any administration change are probably a slowdown in processing times for at least a while. And I heard somebody call it legislation by RFE. We sort of get our first sense of where they're coming from by the types of requests for more evidence we start to see coming in on cases that we filed. So those are two things that we will probably see that will affect the tech industry.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting to see the play and the tension from President-elect Trump and his immediate advisory board, if you will, of people that are very pro-legal immigration. And I just read something yesterday saying, they may extend something to international students and make it easier for them to remain in the U.S., which would be so joyful because it's so difficult as an international student when you're here for years studying to then stay long term. So there's lots of speculation, and unfortunately it's a wait and see. But I really think that based on some of the stuff, like I like to call it some of the like inflammatory stuff, mass deportations, the government come knocking on your door, the military being used, right? That's super inflammatory rhetoric. with respect to anything of that nature, if I have a crystal ball, and I would probably bet money on this, I just don't think we're going to see anything wide and extreme like that for a few reasons. Number one is the manpower. The government does not have the type of manpower to look for, they're estimating from 11 to 20 million individuals in the US without lawful immigration status. It's going to cost a small fortune. And more importantly, legally, the Trump administration is hanging their hat on a law from the 1800s that has not been used in a very long time, that does allow for mass removal of people, but it also requires Congress to declare an act of war, which is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I would go on record saying that. So any of the things that sound anti-American will most likely not happen. Or if they happen for a few days, they will be quickly halted. The ACLU is all over this already. They're actually, prepared for lawsuits. Like, they're ready to go. So in terms of the takeaway, I wouldn't be expecting a knock on the door from the government. Now, that can happen on any normal day, right? But with respect to this threat, I think it's a very, very hard thing for them to pull off.
Well, that sort of goes into play with one of our questions about how likely is it Trump will deport people with DACA, or how quickly, and would marrying an American bypass this? So I haven't dealt with a lot of DACA cases, to be quite honest, but from what I've heard this Trump administration talk about, largely is focused on people who entered and are here without any type of lawful status, and who maybe have a criminal background, right? That is purportedly the focus of their efforts initially. So right now the DACA program's in place, and those individuals are not here unlawfully. So there's no way of knowing how quickly. I don't know if you've heard anything, Rosanna.
I haven't. One of the things on my immigration wish list is always for DACA to be resolved in a positive way. Every administration since Obama has kicked this around, and it's been punted and changed, and it's gone up to the courts and gone back down to the government. And I would just love somebody to just resolve DACA once and for all. It's been so stressful. I can't imagine being a DACA recipient, but I agree with you. It doesn't seem to be in the lane of where they're really thinking. They're focused more on criminality and, crossing the border unlawfully. So, and in terms of marrying an American citizen, unfortunately, we can't give you specific legal advice today. We are not allowed to do that as practitioners. Happy to talk to you offline if you want to schedule something with the office. But do appreciate that's a really good question. And it's one that I'll be watching closely because, like I said, this one's been back and forth for way too many years, in my opinion. So, Andy, what else are we going to do? What if you're a company or a business? What are you seeing from clients in terms of concerns, or what is your advice to a client that, might have multinational workforce, coming in and out of the U.S.? What do you think best practice is for that type of situation?
Well, in the short term, and currently what you can do, it's sort of like what I said before, talk to your legal advisor and have some backup plans and some awareness of, who in your company is traveling or needs to travel for work. What are your options if you have overseas offices? What are your options to move your global workforce around? And also, what can you plan, or what can you reasonably file, before the unknowns come into play, before January 20th, if there's time, you're in that pocket of time where you can file some extensions and get the green card sort of buttoned up for those key employees. That's great. But it's really hard it's hard to plan. It's just staying on top of it and really working with legal counsel about what those options are, I would say.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, we definitely want to make sure that everyone's aware of expiration dates and travel plans,
Yes.
mobility issues. We've got the holidays coming up. That's always a popular time for people to travel, making sure they've got their
Yeah.
valid visas for reentry. I think that's really important. And it
And
leads
of
into,
course,
go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, of course, getting, you might want to consider even an internal audit of your I-9 records, make sure those are all up to date and taken care of so that, if there is more of the workplace enforcement efforts, your records are as accurate as they can be.
Yeah, those I-9s are certainly important. And I've heard so many horror stories, not with our clients, but just people in general, of getting an audit and having, some missing information. It's really, really expensive, from a fine perspective. So I see we have another question about, are we expecting, an uptick in case denials or, certain cases, or is it just general? I think as Andy said a little bit earlier, in immigration, we don't get outright denials, but we get what's called a request for evidence. And it's the bane of every immigration lawyer's existence, because a lot of time it's asking for irrelevant things or things that we have already included. But I think within the first quarter of 2025, rather than listening to the TV, listen to your friendly immigration lawyers, because we'll be able to detect patterns and trends and share those with our clients. And that's really the benefit, without sounding self-serving, of working with an immigration firm, because we are filing tons and tons of cases every week, and patterns and trends develop very quickly. And the government can say one day, like, oh, we're no longer accepting that as evidence. And we see this. I've seen this for 25 years, right? The government is not saying, oh, okay, immigration lawyers, we're going to change this right now. Usually it's some backdoor, backhanded internal change, and then we shift the way we practice. And I expect that we'll be seeing a lot of different things within probably the first quarter of next year, and we'll have a good handle on how's this hanging together. I do have to say, one of the high points of the prior Trump administration was how they revamped the H-1B lottery system, which I think was the smartest thing any government has ever done, because we don't have to file the whole petition up front, and that's worked really well. And I'm hoping that they keep that. I feel like in 27 years of practicing, that's maybe one of my top 3 favorite things that has ever happened, because it just makes it easier for both employers and employees. So we have another question, Andy, about the EB3 visa category. How do you think that will be impacted by the new administration?
Well, as this person probably knows, just by the nature of their question, many of the employment-based green card categories are backlogged and are not available. It depends on what type of industry and what type of job you're asking about for the EB3. If you're inquiring about, say, nurses and populations that have special carve-outs, Schedule A types of things, I don't see there being a lot of change one way or the other. That's what happened the last time, which turned out to be sort of a good thing in healthcare, right? For physicians and nurses who have their sort of separate paths towards green cards, is, nothing changed for the worse. Nothing really got much better. The backlogs on green cards in all categories, EB2 and EB3, are pretty significant right now. And, everyone's hopeful that that will get cleared up and get better. And there is, by the way, it's been sitting there in iterations forever, there is legislation in front of Congress but it hasn't been put to a vote on increasing some of those numbers, right? So available green cards in the EB2 and EB3 category. And there is some bipartisan support. What the Trump administration will do with that, we don't know. There's a visa bulletin that comes out every month that shows if there's any movement on that. But if I had to predict things, I would say in general, that backlog's not going to get cleared out anytime soon. And I don't think there's any real efforts to do so.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that those numbers that are determined for each visa classification have nothing to do with an administration, right? Those are set by Congress. The Department of State issues the numbers and the numbers of people in line every month. So, like Andy said, it would be great if some bipartisan legislation came up to increase those numbers, which would allow the cases to move. But, with respect to the actual applications in front of USCIS, I think, we might see some extra attention paid to them, but nothing that we can't work through and hopefully get a good result. And, we'll just have to do a wait and see on these green card types of cases. Let's see, we have another question. Do you anticipate any changes to green card queues for Indians, Chinese, Mexicans? Should someone who is expecting to file the I-140 wait for reform or do it before commencement? So we can't answer the specific question because that would be deemed legal advice. But in terms of changing the wait times for India, China, and Mexico, Andy, can you just talk in general about why those three countries have significant backlogs?
Sure. So, we have a per country limit assigned for each country, and certain countries are the demand is very high and they're very oversubscribed. So India, China, traditionally. So those the unavailability of permanent visas has just grown because we haven't, or Congress hasn't, changed that number, the limit every annual, that annual limit to those permanent visas becoming available. It hasn't changed with the demand. So as demand has grown, those numbers have stayed stagnant. As new visa numbers become available, they're already eaten up by the people sort of waiting in line for those. So that's where that comes from. So the only real way to clear it up in any significant way is if that annual quota was somehow either redistributed or increased for certain populations. And, that's anybody's game. I personally haven't heard, based on, India, China, Mexico specific programs. I do know that in the healthcare realm, there's been proposals in the past to, like I said, carve out for nurses or international medical graduates who come here to train and work, possibly opening up some numbers for them to be able to get green cards. I haven't heard of it in any other industry, though. Have you, Rosanna?
I haven't either, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But in terms of getting your place in line, Andy, what determines that? So it's a system of supply and demand. There's backlogs because the demand's greater than the supply. But what determines your place in that line? Is it the filing? Is it what's the answer on that one?
Yeah, you have to get an assigned priority date, and that can be assigned. That date, which secures sort of your place in that line, can be assigned if it's a perm-based, employment-based process. You get assigned a priority date when on filing of the perm. If it's a like national interest waiver, if it's I don't know, anything, EB2, EB1, it could be assigned at the time the I-140 is approved. So it's sort of complicated if you haven't looked at it before, but if you look at the visa bulletin, Department of State visa bulletin, it has a cutoff date. So if your priority date that you were assigned when that I-140 was filed for you, or when you were, when that perm was filed by your employer, when that I-140 was approved, whatever that priority date that gets assigned is, you look at the cutoff dates on the monthly visa bulletin to see if they're up to your date yet. So, you know, like you look at maybe the EB2 category for India right now, and it looks like, oh my gosh, it's going to be, you know, 12 years, 14 years before that date. And yeah, that's an estimation, but it could get longer. It could improve. It just depends. So,
all right.
Getting the first steps of the green card filed are how you get in that line, basically. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So our final question for today, we're going to wrap up because we'd like you to eat lunch and enjoy the rest of the day, is, you know, should we rush and file our cases? Is that going to make it better, worse? My opinion on this, and every lawyer has a different opinion, but I believe that you should file your application when it is complete, accurate, and contains all the information that mirrors the regulations. If that is after January 1, I think you're fine. You don't want to put garbage in because you're going to get garbage out from the government. And so I think, you know, outside of traveling abroad, I think if you're within the United States and you have the ability to file today or in January, I don't think it's going to be a huge difference, but I think it should be very strategic and happen based on the quality of the application. You don't want to submit something that's, you know, a shortfall of documents. So anyway, thank you for being here. We are your friends at Berardi Immigration Law. We do this all day, every day. And I do a ton of media. Andy is one of our premier experts in physician, immigration law, and employment-based. We're here to be your partners. Please don't lose sleep over this stuff. I know it's scary. I know the language is really terrifying, but we're here to tell you that we've been through this before. We'll go through it again, and we get cases approved. It might take longer. It might look a little bit different, but you're hearing a lot of noise right now, and that noise is only going to be amplified come January. But the truth is, we have the United States Constitution and 3 branches of government that I keep harping on that I know at the end of the day will not allow anything blatantly discriminatory to occur. So it might not be what we want it to look like, but we're here for you. We do this all day, every day. The firm's 20 years old. We have a great group of practitioners. Feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are posting videos almost daily right now. We're on all the other social platforms. We're all over this and watching this for you. So Andy, thank you for being here today with me. Thank you for the audience and all of your good questions. And we'll continue to keep you posted, but have a great day.
Have a good day. Thanks.